of course, the funniest part of the 1792 rebellion was Erg the Unclean, who became quite a cult figure. I know, being called the Unclean and becoming popular, but he became quite charismatic and earned a lot of rights for the goblins through that. So are you ready for the History of Magic exam? I can't believe that you're going to study with me. Nobody ever wants to study this early in the semester. Oh, everybody in May always coming along. Hermione, can you help me now? Hermione, I don't understand anything. Can you help me? And of course, I'm willing to help them. But I always say, if you did this earlier in the term, you wouldn't have to worry about it right now, would you? So I'm always looking for another study partner who doesn't want to just wait until the last minute. So I'm so excited to have you along. Yes, so I do have a couple of notes that I've already taken about the Goblin Rebellions. Shall we just go over those? So they're just my atlases. Oh yes, my parents sent me those atlases. They know how much I love books, and they know not really a lot about magical books, so they like to give me atlases. So this is what I have. Obviously we have the three main rebellions, the one in 1612, 1752 and 1791. You don't remember about any of those. What do you remember about the Goblin Rebellions? Well, then let me tell you. So the one in 1612, basically what happened is, as with all of the Goblin Rebellions, do you pay attention when Professor Binns is giving his lectures? You're just like Ron and Harry. They can't keep their eyes open. I mean, I understand he does have a rather relaxing way about him, but all of the information is just so fascinating. I could never even think of closing my eyes. Just so much information. Oh, he is a repository of history magic, historical knowledge, and magical knowledge as well. Oh, he's wonderful. I don't know why everyone complains so much, really. Anyway, so as with all Goblin Rebellions, they all have a common theme. So basically, most goblins don't like that wizards see themselves as a ruling class over all of other magical beings. So it's a bit of a touchy subject, really, as goblins are obviously sentient. You have other animals that don't have any sentience. Even dragons, while they are quite intelligent, they're not really sentient. But obviously we talk with goblins, we talk with house elves, which, you know, I am a big supporter of house elves. But I have a little bit of mixed feelings when it comes to goblins. And the reason is these rebellions. whenever there's rebellions, there's always, well, I don't want to say torture, but the goblins don't quite act appropriately, shall we say, towards wizard kind. So I do have problems with that. Anyway, back in 1612 was one of the first Goblin Rebellions, and it happened because a goblin stole a wizard wand, and that was in Hawksmeade. Yeah, so it wasn't in London or anything like that. It was right here, very close to us. Next time you're in Hawksmeade, you could even go over and look and see. The 3 broomsticks was actually used as the headquarters for the wizards in suppressing the rebellion. So there was a little bit of fuss, but not too much fuss, and then that was kind of put to bed. But unauthorized use of wands. But it was one wand that was stolen, but it was being passed around. So multiple goblins ended up being put in Azkaban from that. Then the next one was just 140 years later, and it was in 1752. This was a large rebellion. The one in 1612 was somewhat laying the groundwork. It didn't have all that spice and pizzazz of a full-on rebellion. But by the time 1752, came around, the goblins were very, very upset that no movement had been made on being able to use wands. Now, the whole issue with goblins and wands is basically goblins have a fair amount of magic without wands. They have more magic than wizards do without wands. Obviously, there's a little bit we can do. I can say Accio wand and my wand will come. And, the like, we can ride broomsticks. That doesn't require a wand. But most of our work does require wands or magical elements. Potion making, not so much wands, but obviously you still need a lot of magical elements. But with goblins, they're actually quite magically inclined on their own. And so if you give a goblin a wand, it is far superior to a wizard. Because but it's also a bit unpredictable, the magic, because wands are created for wizards, by wizards. And if a goblin has a wand that's made for a wizard, it can have unintended consequences. Such as doing a simple, charm to just brown your toast in the morning could lead to a forest fire. And so, while I empathize with the desire to have a wand, the wands really don't suit goblins, in my opinion. Probably a little bit of a controversial opinion, but that is my opinion. Anyway, I digress. In 1752, this broke out across the whole of Great Britain, and there were multiple locations. People were disapparating, apparating all throughout. It was a big headache for the ministry, for many muggles were witness to goblins, which they've never seen before, and they were going around running mad, to be quite honest. So this began again with a stolen wand, but this time the goblins ramped it up, and they actually stole and kidnapped a wand maker. and so they had enslaved a wand maker to produce them wands. So there were actually quite a few unauthorized wands for goblins going around. Of course, the wand maker had no idea how to make a wand for a goblin that wouldn't, that could actually accurately harness their magic. It's just not known in wand lore. So the ministry was under a lot of pressure. Albert Booth was the Minister of Magic when this began. He was not for very much longer. He shortly after resigned because people were calling for his head, and seriously they should be, because these goblins were running amok, wizards were being injured. There was a big chance that wizard kind was going to be discovered. So it was very important to suppress that. But it wasn't. He was replaced by Basil Flack. It's actually interesting if you look at Goblin Rebellion. If you look at this period of time and the fantasy literature that comes out of the Muggle world, you'll actually see a lot more reference to goblins. And that is because of this rebellion. It's because as much as memory charms can be used to modify memories, the whisper still exists. And that could come back in your dreams or fantasy. So it's a big debacle, that. So Basil Flack, he came in as the next Minister for Magic. And then, when he was Minister, not only did you have these goblins with their unauthorized wands, they then aligned with the werewolves. And so you had this kind of two-front war for the ministry. It was a huge headache. Basil Flack only lasted 2 months. And then it was Hephaestus Gore. Now this is a hard name to spell, so it's Hespaeustus. Then Gore, Gore. And he was a very powerful, authoritative figure. And he was able to quickly suppress the rebellion. He got the wand maker back. And things returned relatively to normal. Except for, of course, these extended mentions of goblins. Even wizards and witches became much more abundant in that time in the lore, in the Muggle world. So, a bit of a concern, but mostly was sorted. So that was in 1752. It actually only lasted about 6 months, but it was a long 6 months. Now, Hephaestus Gore was gone by 1791. Obviously, that's 39 years later. He didn't want to be minister for that long. And there was another uprising. This was another rebellion. Now, this one was a bit interesting, because you have Erg the Unclean. He led the revolts. These were in London, but he was a very, very popular and charismatic figure, which is quite uncommon in the goblins. And he became popular even among wizards. So there became a lot of support for goblins, not necessarily with wands, but in other areas. So that was solved a little bit more diplomatically. So they were given more rights in other areas. That's actually when they took full control over Gringotts. So previously they had worked at Gringotts and their magic was used, but the power was held still outside of that. And basically they had to follow orders. But part of what happened with Urg the Unclean was that Gringotts would go completely over to the goblins. And that's a big coup for them, to be able to hold basically all of Wizarding Kind's money and goods and riches. So very, very good for them, and it's been fairly positive since that time. It was suppressed, no violence, as I said, with that. So those are what I know. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add? Yeah, I've kind of yammered on a bit, haven't I? Oh, I just get so excited talking about the Goblin Rebellions. They're fascinating parts of history. Oh, well, they're so important to us nowadays, just to understand, what leads to people rebelling, what leads to people wanting to do these sort of things. And I mean, as much as we don't even like to consider it, why even does you-know-who do what he does? And so it's important to understand the history there, so we can understand, well, what conditions might make the goblins not want to side with the wizards. Because it's important, it's very important that we keep the goblins on our side. If we don't, well, as I said, they have control of a lot. So, knowing our history can be quite important, can't it? Yes, so that's my notes. And it's always good for me. I love being able to share the stories and retell it. It helps me study it as well, because a lot of those details I kind of know, but wouldn't be able to pull them out in an exam situation. So being able to chat with you like this, it helps it get locked away in my memory. Oh, yes. Now we should definitely do it again, shouldn't we? Well, I mean, what other subjects are you taking? Is there some other subject that you'd like us to revise?